She said the coolest thing. She said, "We knew you would figure out a way to make art into a career." Never told anybody I actually had done that work. When I would go to the interview, I'd say I didn't actually do any of that work for Nike. I just wanted to pretend I had. And they said, "Well, we don't care."
Well, hello and welcome to the first ever episode of the Sketchy AF podcast. My name is Jonathan. I'm here on the Sherbury Studios YouTube channel, and today I am joined by the internationally award-winning illustrator Kyle T. Webster. He has his work featured in many publications, including Time Magazine, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Entertainment Weekly, and more, and the creator of the internationally renowned KyleBrush.com, the world's leading creator of digital brush sets that have been used in studios such as Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks, HBO, and more. Kyle, how are you? Thank you for being here.
I'm really doing fine, and thanks so much for having me, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to be here. And also, gosh, you know what? I failed to notice when you reached out to me that this was the first episode, so now I feel extra special
Yes.
and
Well,
really, wow.
on that point, we first, obviously, for anyone watching who won't know, we first got into any kind of contact. It was actually by a communication over on Twitter. There was a post put up by, I think it might have been one of the YouTube pages, and it asked the question, is there anybody in the world that you would like to collaborate with? So I just thought I'll shoot my shot here, and I tagged Kyle in the post. And the reason for it being was, for anyone who's watching anything on the channel, I have been kind of documenting my journey getting back into art. I had a 12-year gap just due to I was working in art, and I didn't at the time have the self-confidence or those skills to really follow through on it. So I didn't just leave the job that I had. I left art entirely, and I felt the need to get back to it. And when I decided to go back into digital illustration, I looked up tutorials on YouTube, as people do. And most of the times we click into a video, we see somebody, and within 3 seconds we've decided if we connect with them. So I kind of went in and out of multiple videos until I came across the very man here, Kyle T. Webster. It was the illustration masterclass over on the Adobe Live channel, and straight away I felt a connection with you. I felt a connection with the way you delivered information. It was very informative, but it wasn't in any way speaking down. It was just you had a very approachable way in which you presented the information. And so I attributed seeing your video when I did it as a really big part of encouraging me to take that step and to get into illustration. So it was by design that you were the first person to come on the show. That was always going to be the case.
Oh, wow. Everything you said is very flattering. Thank you. Teaching is my favorite thing to do. And so the fact that whatever I was saying or doing on that particular live stream, you may have caught a replay of, that just makes me so happy to know that it resonated. So thank you.
Oh, no, without a doubt. I think when most people are attempting to get back into anything that is love and a passion of them, there's that trepidation where you're teetering on the edge of making that decision to jump back in. And sometimes you do need something external to make you feel, oh yeah, this is something that I can do. And for me, you were that external factor that made it seem accessible, that made it seem something that was fun, that was enjoyable, and something that I could get into. So, it was a live stream that you were doing, but it did have a massive impact in getting me back into this journey, which, it's led me on 5 of the greatest months that I've ever had following passions again. It's a life affirming thing. So you had a major role in that.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, I don't know what to say. Thank you so much. So I want to ask you a question. If I know it's
Oh,
you
go
have me
ahead.
as a, but I just want to ask,
No, that's fine. Not a problem at
what
all.
what is it that got you back into wanting to make art after such a long gap?
Yeah, well, it all kind of kicked off. I studied in illustration and graphic design initially. I got up to getting my degree, and I got a job. I was living down in Belfast in Ireland at the time, and I got a job working as a graphic designer for a big company that they ran lots of different venues, entertainment venues around the city, and they needed someone to do, brochures and menus and all sorts of promotional stuff. And I went in for the interview, and I was 20 years old. I had no experience in the industry. I had never done anything aside from just my own little bits and pieces that I did in my spare time. And when I got the phone call to go for the interview, there was no joy, happiness, or elation, or those feelings that you might feel when you're going for an interview in the career you've been studying for. I was terrified. I was like absolutely terrified. And so I put my portfolio together, and I went to their offices for the interview. And when I got there, everyone else was, people in their 40s who obviously had a huge work experience. So that made that even worse. And I was just so anxious and nervous. And I don't even remember the interview itself. I remember going in there and I came out thinking I didn't do as badly as what I thought I did, but that was probably because I thought I was going to go in there and completely have a panic attack and maybe jump out a window. So the fact that I did better than that isn't saying too much. But I left and I went back to my normal job, didn't think anything of it. And then I got a phone call from them saying that you got the job. And again, it was terrible. I went in and because of I didn't have the self confidence, I didn't have the self belief, or I didn't have any of those tools to cope with the reality of following your dream. And so I quit the job, ran away for 12 years, but it wasn't just away from professionally. I completely dropped art in its entirety for well over a decade. And it was only this past December, I was talking to my two kids. We have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. And I was having the conversation that I think every parent has, which is you can be anything you want to be and you've got to follow your dreams. And the little voice in the back of my head was saying, you're a complete hypocrite. How can you tell this to them when you didn't do that? And so I sat all over Christmas with this mulling in my head saying, you want to you want to show them that this is a path that they can walk and you want to do the best that you can by them. So I just thought, right, I have to do it. And then that's where it led me to typing something in on YouTube. And then this lovely articulate man came up on my screen, and that's been it. We're 5 months in, and we just finished a second craft fair yesterday, which is great. But it's been such a tremendous experience. I think anyone with anything creative to them, you need to be out there and living your dream. And that was the story that led to you.
Wow. It's funny though, because I don't know how you feel about it. Looking back now, like I hope you don't feel disappointed in yourself or anything, because I mean, at that age, to be 20 or 21 years old and then really going for something like that, and then people tell you, oh yeah, well we like what you're doing, and yeah, you've got the job. The imposter syndrome is it must be just crushing.
Oh
And of
yeah.
course, that's going to cause all kinds of anxiety and concern. And you wonder, even if I was able to put together um, a decent portfolio, could I, on demand, put out work that's consistently good enough to hold on to this job and to continue doing this work that they think I can do? And so, I think everything you described is it's just really normal for anybody. Not even just necessarily because of the age factor, but just because of the lack of experience actually doing it professionally. You need time to build confidence. Maybe even decades. In my case.
Well, that was interesting because as I kind of connected in with you, I've discovered your own YouTube channel, your own website, and because I felt that kind of connection with you. And one of the things that I find very almost reassuring in a way is you were quite open in different interviews and different videos where you've talked about your own issues with anxiety and how you've struggled with things. And from the outside looking at you, I would see this guy who you know this is someone who's a real leading light in his industry for what he's done. I mean, the stuff you've done with Kyle Brush, it's huge, and to know that it's still a human being on the other side of that, it does make following that journey seem approachable for anyone because you see the human side to it. Not there's this person that they've done it. It's not for me. This is someone who you know they were destined for it, where other people might not.
No, so much of it is luck and timing, and then just so much of it's also just trying stuff, and you just eventually learn formulas for what works and what doesn't work. The other thing I learned early on, fortunately, was when I say early on, I mean maybe earlier than others might learn it, or at least I was able to see it, was that the people I know who are like you and me who want to do things that are creative and they want to make things, um, we tend to be very self-critical of the work we're making. We tend to look for the flaws, and we tend to, whatever we make, um, immediately think, well, it could be a little better after having completed the work. And then, but what I learned was with a lot of the work I was doing for clients, that whatever my standards were for myself, those were not the standards that they were setting for me. They
Yeah.
would receive the work and say, "This is great," and then pay me, and then hire me again. So I'm glad that I was able to, before it, before too long, notice that, because it meant that it took the pressure off, so that if I were doing what I would consider to be maybe a C plus to B minus job on an illustration, um, from their point of view, it was meeting the criteria they had laid out for the job. It solved the problem, whatever it was, the visual problem that they had. They were happy and it was on time, and so they paid me and hired me again. So there was a disconnect there with my expectations for myself and their expectations for me. And so as soon as I was able to sort of accept that and be comfortable with that, it did take a lot of the pressure off, and I felt more confidence going into new situations and newer jobs. And then I think also the other thing is you start to recognize patterns, and you can sort of tell what someone's expectations are for certain jobs. And with illustration, for me, a lot of it was editorial. So if somebody is requesting some spot illustrations for something, just little black and white spot illustrations, I sort of knew what they expected in terms of the delivery, like the quality and all that. That because I had done it before, and this is like everything in life, right? You do it a few times, it works out. The next time you go to do that same thing, you feel like, oh yeah, like I can cook a fried egg. I've done that before. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that kind of helped. That helps, and I think that's sort of how it goes. Their whole length of your career is just you do a few things, you get kind of comfortable doing them. You maybe up your game a little bit, get comfortable at that level, and it all just kind of becomes a little bit second nature, and you take the pressure off yourself as long as the people who are hiring you, you'd realize their expectations are almost never quite as high as your own for yourself.
Yeah, you actually, I remember I'd read over, you put up quite an interesting post there over on Accidental Expert about something quite similar there. Just, I think, believe it was just last month, actually, we were talking about you being your own biggest critic. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the biggest sort of things you have to do is getting out of your own way. And I definitely think that that's something that most people that I speak to, getting back into art, I've been able to reconnect with the art community. I've been able to meet new people who otherwise I wouldn't have, because I was so, removed from it. And what I've kind of found with most creative people, whether they're artists, illustrators, writers, poets, whatever it might be, that there does seem to be the fact that they're the person that holds themselves back. I've always kind of thought that from my own perspective, if you're creative, if you're making anything and you're putting it out there into the world, you're taking a little bit of your soul and you're putting it out there to be judged and to be seen by people. And it's an
Yeah,
incredibly difficult thing to do. But when you do that, and I've been fortunate in the sense that getting to go out and do different things like bringing my art to craft fairs, and you're meeting people face to face, most of the time people aren't going to say horrible things face to
yeah,
face. I mean, it might happen sometimes, but generally speaking, that isn't the case. And with the art community, I've always found that the art community is one of the most supportive and just filled with nice people communities that there are. It's a wonderful group of people who they do get behind people and they do believe in other artists, and it's that whole artist supporting artists thing. It's there, and I felt that for me personally, that was one of the biggest confidence builders that I had come across.
I
But
agree.
anyway,
It is
oh
the
sorry,
nicest group of people. Yeah.
yeah, no, it is absolutely. But one of the things I kind of wanted to talk whenever I have anybody into the show to talk a little bit about how their art journey began. Sharing a lot on this channel about my own art journey. I've always wanted to hear from other people, so I was quite curious with yourself. Uh, is art something that was just it was always there in you from your earliest memories?
Yeah. So when I was tiny, I was always drawing, always just copying things that were in comic books that were around. I mean, when I say drawing and tiny, I mean it's like 4 years old or even younger.
Yeah,
Um, and my parents, we lived in this house in Connecticut at the time, where there was a room that was very long on one side of the house that my mom turned into a preschool. And the reason she did that was so that she could be at home with my twin brother and I, um, and also so taking care of us, but also making money. So it was a really brilliant idea. So this long room in the house became the preschool, and my brother and I were there. And because it was a preschool, there was all this access to crayons and markers and pencils and everything just
yeah,
always there because the other kids were going to use them during the day. So I had sort of a little art supply closet all to myself and could draw anytime I wanted. And there were also coloring books available and things. So it all just kind of fell into place. And Star Wars had just come out, a few years after I was born, I think. And there were these coloring books for Star Wars, and so what I did was color the books. I remember this. I remember even this book, this Star Wars coloring book, specifically. Like there are images in my brain that are burned in there that I would copy from the book. So I would color them, but then I would also on a separate piece of paper just copy what I was looking at. So that was it. I was bitten by the bug. I drew, and of course, like every child or even adult, if someone pays you a compliment when you're doing something, it's encouraging. You're going to keep doing it because you like getting that praise. So whenever anybody said, "Oh, that's a good drawing," it was like a little noise in my head, a little sort of like if you think of Super Mario jumping up and you get that little coin sound
Yes.
and ding, and so those are accumulating, and that just lasted all the way through school. So up until when I graduated high school, I was always the kid who drew, and the other kids ask you to draw their favorite comic characters or whatever cartoon characters, and you just feel a connection with them that way. You have this sort of kind of magical ability that they really love. um, People respond to it. It really is kind of like a magic trick, and that's also something that I'm interested in, probably because they're related. This whole idea of doing something kind of inexplicable and surprising, and I think it's because uh, it's rare when you're an adult to be surprised by things, and I think I responded to that as well, and other people responded to it, and I loved that feeling of being able to do something that people couldn't do or couldn't really explain. Where you and I both know that it's really just hours and hours of practice, like playing an instrument or doing anything else. You just repeat this thing and you get better at it. But
Yeah.
you don't want to take away from the mystery of it and explain it that way. You just say, yeah, I'm good at drawing, whatever. So that carried me through to college, where I was a fine art major, which fortunately, because my parents were both teachers and were both supporters of the arts and everything, they never said to me, that's probably not the most practical thing to do. And I talked to my mom about this very recently, actually. I said, how come you never did say uh, something more along the lines of, "Are you sure you don't want to study law?" Um, and she said the coolest thing. She said, "We knew you would figure out a way to make art into a career because you loved it so much, and that you wouldn't allow it to not happen. They
Yeah.
believed that I would figure it out. So I thought that was really cool that they had that much confidence in me.
Without a
Um,
doubt. Yeah.
yeah, it's very nice. So anyway, yeah, college fine art major, drawing a bunch of naked people. Find a lot of figure drawing. Um, I applied for a fellowship to go to Yale University for a 6-week program in the summer between my junior and senior year of college, which really transformed everything. And I studied with these working artists at the time and these people from all over the world, these kids who got to come. I was very, very competitive, but I was fortunate to get into that, and that really kind of took me up another level. And when I graduated, it was my own fear, much like you, this
Yeah.
fear of like, can I do this? Can I make it? That made me not really go for an art thing at all. I did web design, which is at the time was creative, and I love technology and I love art, so it was kind of a mesh of the two. But you know, I did that for a while because I was afraid I wouldn't be able to make money. So I was a web designer. I fortunately got laid off during the first little internet bust there, around 2000 ish, and then I worked as a graphic designer after that because I made a mock portfolio. We could talk about this. I love telling students this part where I made a portfolio of work that I had apparently done for brands like Nike and whatever else, but I hadn't done any. But I just pretended I had, and I made the
I've done
portfolio because these are
that.
cooler clients, right? Yeah. And I shopped it around some design firms and ad agencies in town. I got a bunch of freelance work for about 3, 4 months, which paid even better than my previous job. And then I got hired full time as an in house illustrator and designer at a design firm based on that mock portfolio. Um, and I never told anybody I actually had done that work. When I would go to the interview, I'd say I didn't actually do any of that work for Nike. I just wanted to pretend I had. And they said, "Oh, we don't care. It's good work." And I think that's the lesson to take away from it. It's just not that it's not like you're telling some kind of lie that's going to get you in trouble if you just say, "Oh yeah, I just thought this how I would handle this job if Nike asked me to do it." Whatever.
Yeah. Well, I think I
Um,
remember doing something similar a long time ago in a portfolio for an interview I went into. And I think the kind of belief I had at the time was if I can demonstrate my ability to do the work, whether or not I have actually done it for this company, isn't really relevant if I can display that I have the skills and I have the ability to actually go ahead and do it. So yeah,
I
I've
think
done
you're
that little trick
exactly
too.
right. Yeah, that's exactly right. That they just want to see your skills. They don't. That's the thing. So anyway,
I
yeah, I
did
did that for
find.
a while.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, no, please.
No, I thought it was quite interesting. One of the little things you said there that it really kind of clicked with me as well is you were talking about going into the web design thing because it was still a creative endeavor, but perhaps it was the not believing that you might be able to make the career from art. I do actually kind of feel that that was similar to whenever I went into graphic design as my choice. It was still a creative pursuit. However, ideally, I would have wanted to be doing a lot more of, now I'm just doing illustrations all the time. And, I felt that there was more of a maybe an industry to the graphic design side to it. And it was
Yeah.
one of those kind of, I think I remember feeling for the first time that kind of crushing reality when I did my first sort of professional graphic design job. And I realized that, someone would say, we need this brochure made for something. And all of a sudden the creative part of my brain is saying, oh, we could do this and we could do that and this. And you're like, no, 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 we need something very simple, picture, headline, area for text. And you're just like, oh, have I just
Yes.
spent all these years studying for something that is actually going to be a little bit soul destroying here? So,
That's the thing that they don't tell you is that 90% of the work you do in graphic design is that.
yeah,
Um, Unless you carve out a niche for yourself where you almost exclusively do really creative and amazing projects. But there are so few people who do that, and I think that's the danger of the internet is that you look up to these people who show off all this amazing work all the time, and you think, oh, that's what this job is, and then you come to find out later that no, no, they're just in this tiny, tiny group of people who've made it to a point where they can pick and choose the most fun creative jobs you can imagine, and there are very few people like that, but they seem to be the model for what's normal, and that's I think
yeah,
very misleading to people. So I found the same thing because even though I was drawing in house at this place, the majority of my time was spent doing what you just described. Do a brochure for this, do a annual report for that, do a whatever. Um, you know, I even spent a week one time making for Target this uh, department store here in the States, or maybe it was Walmart. I can't remember. Who cares? But it was just little labels for all the many bras that were offered by Hanes at the time, Hanes underwear. Like literally just these tiny little tags that would read the name of the bra, the size, and some other descriptor. It was just text being laid out in these tiny little formats, and we had to do hundreds of them for all these different SKUs of different bras. That was part of the job, and that's obviously not super creative.
yeah.
So
One of the things that I'd seen watching, I believe it was actually a video over on your own YouTube channel where it was more of a kind of introduction you were doing for yourself. You had mentioned that when you were kind of growing up, you did go to a lot of different countries, like you
yes,
had traveled around quite a lot. I thought that was quite interesting because obviously it's not what most people would experience, but in terms of as an artist and having experienced those cultures and getting to travel around, was there parts about that kind of element of your growing up that you feel had a big impact on your own artistic tastes or your own skills?
absolutely, sure. Spending the majority of my childhood in Southeast Asia, I was exposed at an age earlier than most American kids to manga and anime and all these other cool things that just hadn't quite made their way over to the States and other parts of the world. So Um, and not only that, but we got to travel to places like Bali, and we were in Thailand and Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia and Jakarta in
Wow.
Indonesia, and just seeing if you just literally just walking down the street any of these places, you're going to see art and you're going to see crafts and you're going to see, um, in places like not just in shops and things like that and little touristy knickknacks, but you also could go to temples and places where there's this amazing art carved out of wood of various gods and goddesses and deities and whatever else. And there's just so much of that just obviously seeping into my brain at a very young
Yeah.
age. And it must have had a huge impact. I can't exactly articulate how,
Hmm.
but there are things that I'm drawn to, no pun intended, that I know come from my exposure to these things as a kid. And the other thing too about it was knowing from a very early age that, and this is a distinctly American thing, I want to say, just as a quote unquote American citizen, but not really.
Yeah.
I consider myself a third culture kid, which is an expression I've heard bounced around since I was young, where I had this citizenship in this country where I live now, but I didn't grow up here, so I don't have any real attachment to the U.S. honestly,
Yeah.
or I don't feel like it's my home or anything. And I think what's great about growing up in those other places was that I didn't grow up with that sort of weird isolationist feeling that a lot of Americans have of the U.S. is sort of the center of the world. A lot of people I've met here just feel like, well, this is the greatest place to live, and this is all there is to it. And
Yeah.
there's the rest of the world, and there's the U.S. And I didn't have that perspective. I just had the perspective that there's all kinds of places, everyone does things differently, and all of them are cool. And that was sort of it.
Yeah. Well, definitely. I certainly, I guess I've always imagined, being people that grew up in a world that didn't have the internet, I've always kind of thought that kids growing up nowadays, there's that such a fine line where it was great that they would have the opportunity to be exposed to more cultural things, but
Mm,
provided
but
that
not
that
necessarily.
is what, not necessarily how it works in practice, but the
No, you
idea of it
still
would
have to
be
seek that
wonderful.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I
you
think that
have to seek that out.
when you're talking about going around those places in Asia and having art everywhere, especially at a young age, these are your formative years. These are the years where you're really building up how you see the world and how you see yourself and the things that you come in. Having those things there, it's absolutely wonderful. I think living in somewhere like Ireland, art, it's always been such a really big part of our history, but I can't ever say that growing up there was a tremendous amount of art
Mm,
where I grew up. It certainly came much later in life. We were looking definitely always overseas for a lot of the art that we consumed, and it was so strange because it was such a rich history of art in Ireland, and it seemed that it was something that always traveled so well over to America, yet so little people really embraced it over here. And it wasn't
mm.
until you get a little bit older that you do start looking into your own culture and the impact that that's had globally around the world. So it's to hear that you're going out and you're growing up in that way. Certainly, you can see why you've been able to follow this. And as you'd said, your mum telling you that they believed you would be able to do it. I mean, it was right there from the very beginning of your life. So I mean, that's pretty
Yeah,
amazing.
really lucky. And the you were talking about like working as a graphic designer, just jumping back to that for a second, and
Yeah,
then realizing you weren't drawing as much or doing as many creative things. That's why I left the graphic design job in the end. It was, and this may sound like what a luxury that you were able to do that, And but the truth is that I had started working as an illustrator at night for small publications all around the country, and I had built up enough income with that secondary job that I was just doing during the night hours while doing the design job, that I did have the confidence I could continue doing that, and I could really double down on that and start making money during the
yeah,
day as well. So do more jobs. Um, and I left the design job because I was so unhappy, realizing that there was this other opportunity. I could be spending my hours of the day doing the same thing I was doing at night. Why am I coming to this job every day and not doing that? So yeah, I went ahead and quit my graphic design job and went full time into the freelance illustration thing, and it took off from there. I just was really, really dedicated to making it grow as fast as I could, and it did. But there's obviously a lot of promotional work there and a lot of time and energy. But I had that time and I had that energy. I was so excited about it, and so I wanted so badly for it to happen.
So one of the most
Um,
interesting things with calbrush.com was some of the companies that I looked at who were using the brushes. It's obviously such a testament to the quality of the work that you put into them. But I did read you had put up on Accidental Expert a little bit of a story about how you got your brushes into Disney. And I thought it was just an absolutely fantastic story. And I was hoping if you could give us a quick little run through of it here today.
Yeah, happy to. So the thing about trying to approach a big company like that is that because I had no business education, I just sort of went about it the way I thought made sense. So I think if I had been educated about this, I probably would not have even tried, because I'm sure there are certain channels you're supposed to go through, and there are these appropriate ways of approaching these big entities and trying to get yourself, in front of the right people. So instead, what I did was I simply kept doing the same thing I had been doing, which was giving the brushes to artists who I thought would enjoy them and would use them. And I got in touch with a few artists at Disney who were working in their story department, story art, as well as just people who were working in animation. And I sent them free brush sets via email, very simple. And I said, if you like these brushes, first of all, let me know. Second of all, share it on social that you like them. And then third, pass them around to people who you are in the studio with so that they can also use them. And I didn't say, make them buy them from me or anything. Just go ahead and share them. So the idea I had was that I was basically going to infiltrate these studios by getting the brushes to just kind of spread and proliferate into the hands of all these artists in there, with the eventual goal being that what I would do a couple months later, or maybe not even that long, was once I knew that I had this sizable number of artists in Disney using them on a daily basis for their work. I finally approached, I don't remember which artist it was specifically, or maybe a few, and asked if any of them would be cool with sharing with me the email address of their studio manager, um, and or creative director. And in this case, it was a studio manager. And they said sure. And I emailed the studio manager and said, "Hey, did you know that your artists are all using these brushes that I made? And by the way, it'd probably be better for Disney, and it looks better for all parties if you have a bulk license for using them. In addition to the fact that you get them at a discounted rate, but then also any brushes I release in the future, I notify you first before they're released, and you can decide if you want to add them to the suite, also at a reduced rate, blah, blah, blah." And it was surprisingly and almost scarily simple how this all worked, because the guy I talked to was just like, "Sure, send me the license." And I that was it. I just got an official license to have these brushes, or they bought an official license for them to be used in the studio, and that was it. That I could say then publicly, my brushes are officially licensed by, Walt Disney Studios, animation, whatever. And I just, it worked that one time, so that I just repeated it. I did it for Weta Digital, the people who did the Lord of the Rings stuff and a whole
Yeah.
bunch of other things. Sony Pictures Animation. I can't remember if I got a license with Pixar or not. I may have only done some individual licenses there. I can't remember. It's been too long now. Um, but anyhow, that's the story. So it was just,
it, it was so interesting because I think so many people, particularly when you're getting into when you're essentially working as someone who's self-employed, essentially the idea of at any point of your journey, how do you reach out to these huge multinational companies, and how do you get to that stage? And it seems like there isn't really a rule book to it. And I remember just reading that story on Accidental Expert, and I thought, I think you used the words, you might have even said it there now, infiltrating Disney. And I just thought that that was such a brilliant way to go about it. And in fact, it wasn't too long after reading the article that you put up on the newsletter that then that little moment happened where I ended up going, I'll tag Kyle in this and just go for it. It was you kind of, I got a little bit of inspiration that way, but I still have such a remarkable story. Particularly, I get the opportunity to speak to different kind of local artists, and a lot of the stuff that I hear from people is that they don't really know how to approach companies, and they don't know how to get their art into places. And I think
yeah,
that in a lot of ways, you do just have to be a bit bold. You do just have to go out on a limb. Most of the people, yourself being one, and a few of the other guests that are going to be coming on the show afterwards, there were people that I thought, there's no chance that I could ever get, anyone of this caliber, someone who I look at and see that this is such a real professional, incredible, talented artist. There's no way I could get that. And then when you do just kind of reach out and you be direct in that way, it is incredible where you can get and what kind of things can come from it. But I thought it was a
yeah.
fantastic story about Disney. Absolutely wonderful.
Oh, yeah. Well, thanks, and also lucky me. It just worked out. But I think that it's funny because with art, I do think a lot of the times that's how it works out, as a direct approach, just trying to go right towards the thing that you want, whether it's you want to be featured in some collection of work, or you want to be a part of a certain group show, or if you want to work with certain art directors, creative directors, advertising agencies. I think you literally just have to go directly to the source and see. And then if that doesn't work, then you can work backwards from there and start kind of chipping away at it and figuring out other ways to do it. Like, I can't remember if we talked about this uh, already, but my brushes, I was rejected by Adobe 3 times in the process of trying to get them acquired.
No, I didn't
So
know.
yeah, and I'm going to write about this too. It's very important. I want people to know that it wasn't like a one-shot deal, but it was a stepping stone kind of thing, where the first people I approached at the company It was it was the same situation as when I was an illustrator, and I went straight to the New Yorker and was like, "Hey, I want to work with you," and they rejected me and said the work's not good enough,
Yeah.
and so I changed it, and took advice from another art director who I reached out to, who told me how to make it better, um, and eventually I got there. But the same thing with Adobe. The brush business wasn't big enough yet. I didn't yet have the Disney bulk licenses. I didn't have quite the brand recognition yet. The second time I tried, and was rejected, I immediately followed up with an alternative offer. I said, "What about just a few brushes for licensing in another app you have, Adobe Photoshop Sketch on the iPad?" Which, because the Apple Pencil had just come out,
Yeah.
and that sort of became my sort of way in. And then after that, another approach, and it was so anyway that it was a series of tries, with the fourth one being the real one, or maybe it was the yeah, I think the fourth time. Um, it's been a while now, but yeah. So the point is, you can go direct to the source, and if you're rejected, it doesn't mean you should walk away. You can also find other ways to get there eventually. So I really do think that's the way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think that when I think back on my own story and when I think about me, the 20-year-old version of me who started working in graphic design and was just so overwhelmed and intimidated by it and ran off, I definitely didn't have that approach where I thought if I'd failed at something that, that's just part of the learning process and you do need to get back on the horse and you need to go for it. And I didn't have that. And it's certainly only now, maybe later in life, that I don't look at that time where I was away as kind of lost time because I think that it was part of the journey and I had to get to the place that I am now where I feel like I am able to follow through in it and I am able to start making my own path in it. But it's so interesting and I think it's so valuable for other artists and other creatives to know that that rejection and to some it can be crushing in the moment. And I know I've been there and I felt it, but to hear from people who would look at who've went and made a mark in the industry that it wasn't always plain sailing weather, that there were struggles, that every single person who does get to any kind of height in their industry, it doesn't happen just by chance and it doesn't happen it's not a straight line where they travel there. So I think it's always very vital and very important to hear that side of the story, because really I
Yeah,
think that's the making of a lot of people and the character that they become, the work ethic that they get, and it's a big part of their journey. So it's wonderful to hear people like yourself talking about it. And another wee interesting thing that I was wondering, a lot of the work that you do, obviously the work that you're doing with Adobe, there's so much going on there within, I suppose, the digital corporate world. And I was wondering, is there a lot of time in your schedule these days for just your own art? Like, do you just get to sit down and do work just for Kyle these days?
well, less than I probably would want, but a lot of that's due also to the fact that I have a family, and I don't spend as much time on art as I would anyway, because of other factors as well. But one of the nice things about the job I have currently is that because I'm meant to still do what I was doing with the brushes, which is to promote them
Yeah,
and show what's possible and educate other artists about how to use them and how to make the most out of digital tools, generally speaking. The nice thing about that is that if I want to create a piece of art to showcase anything, nobody's telling me what to do. And so, at
yeah.
least several times a week, if I'm doing a live stream or making a video or a demo or making some assets for the Fresco team or whatever, I'm playing my own creative director and I'm just creating something fun and experimental and something that it'll still have that element that's required in it, which is to show some feature or function of a brush.
Uh,
But I get to draw. If I want to draw a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, I'll just draw one. Um, so in some ways, I am doing art for myself, just in that way. But I'm not in the way probably that you're suggesting, like really doing projects that I really want to work on. Um, I've taken some time away from work to do a few other things, like I made an app for meditative drawing. I think and that
Lines of Zen.
Lines of
Yeah.
Zen, yeah,
I
and
was using it actually quite
oh,
recently. It's fantastic.
thank
It
you.
was one of the issues that I remember when I was getting back into this kind of art journey. And obviously, I'd mentioned you were the first person that I discovered who made it seem accessible. And when I seen Lines of Zen with the kind of, I mean, I think everybody has it in their life. And you were mentioning with kids and stuff, it's very stressful. And I find that when I was revisiting getting back to art, I wasn't the same person I was when I left art and ran away from it, but there were still remnants of the issues that caused me to run away from it there. They weren't completely gone. I'm in a different part of my life, but there was residual parts there, and I actually went and downloaded and signed up to Lines of Zen because I wanted to
Oh,
try
thank you.
and not feel pressured in any way with the art, like because of the meditative style of it. And I thought this would be nice to do it just to relax. And it definitely, it was another helpful thing, I think, in this little journey to removing those last little remaining elements of the anxiety that I was feeling because of my previous journey to get to this point. So it was a fantastic app, and anybody watching, if you haven't checked it out, it really, really is great. And not just if you're an artist, I think it's just such a wonderful and relaxing experience to go and do for anyone from any walk of life. But it's a tremendous app, really, really great.
Oh wow, thank you. Well, that was this fine gentleman, Dennis Hennessy, who I work with since 2009, and he lives in Ireland. He and I've never met, but I consider him a good friend. We've been building apps for so long. We made that app together. It took about 2 years of work outside of the work I was already doing, and so with that being the only little project I really had time for, not a
Yeah.
lot of art projects, but I do have a picture book agent with whom I've been passing back and forth ideas, and a couple have gotten a little closer and a little closer to maybe being something we could sell, but no success there yet. I had a book published way back in 2016, and I haven't had one published since.
Please
Um,
say please, wasn't
yes,
that the yeah,
that's the
absolutely. I was
one.
trying to find it actually. It was all up on the American Amazon. I couldn't find a link for it in the UK because I want to. It's one of the ones I'm going to buy for our
Oh,
kids.
wow.
So I'll have to have a look around. I haven't had the time, but I
Just
remember I
give me
couldn't
your
quite
mailing
find it.
address. I'll send you one.
Oh,
That'll
that's fantastic!
I
Thank you
have
very
an extra
much.
one. Yeah, of course.
Oh, brilliant! Yes, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, and the only requirement is that you pass it along to some other family when your kids are too old for it.
Oh, without a doubt, will
Then
do.
it'll stay
You
somewhere
end
in the
up in
world.
that kind of parenting community anyway, so there's constantly you're always meeting with parents and passing stuff back and forward. But no, I would love to have a look at it. Yeah, that's fantastic. So, is there any time that you would have for any kind of? I'm assuming you did come into digital art having already done traditional art. Like
Oh yeah.
I would imagine that would be the background. Do you have any time of doing any kind of traditional art these days, or is it fully digital?
The time I had for traditional art was when I was teaching, and I just quote unquote retired. I mean, that's a funny word at my age, but I retired from teaching after 12 years. I was teaching at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts here, and I was teaching traditional portraiture, life drawing, drawing one, and drawing two, which was all charcoal and graphite on paper.
Yeah,
So that was my time, and it was great, especially the life drawing and the portraiture. It was so wonderful to be in that studio environment again, have models in the room, and just draw from the figure. I love that. That's my favorite thing to do. So I was having some time to do that between August and May, where I would be in the university a couple of days a week, and that was part of the thing with it when Adobe hired me, was that it was in my contract that I could still teach a few classes every semester. They're so cool about that, so I continue to do it, but I did stop because it really was just getting to be too much, and I felt like
yeah,
honestly I wasn't giving enough time and attention to the classes and to the students as I probably should have, and I felt like, okay,
yeah.
I'm not going to do this now. So, but after that, no. In fact, the only real drawing I do with traditional materials now is with my kids. So if they're
Yeah.
drawing or sketching or doing comics and things, I'll jump in there and do something occasionally. But that's kind of about it. So not enough.
I actually sat down myself and the good lady wife. We went to just a few months ago. There was a lady, a local artist here called Maria Duffy, and she had this wonderful exhibition in the Marketplace Theatre here in Armagh. And we went to we went to see her exhibition, and she was then doing a painting workshop. So we both bought tickets, and we went down one day to sit down. She all the materials were provided, and she was going to give us this kind of little run through of her painting process. And for me, it was the first time that I sat down to put actual real paint onto a canvas in, I think I might have been 17 in education, the last time I actually sat and did anything traditional.
Wow.
And so it was all kind of coming together. And once I got over that initial awkwardness, I'm sort of looking at this image and thinking, oh, this isn't too bad. I'm quite happy. And then I looked over at my wife, and she'd never really did much artistic stuff at all. And I just look over and she's done this thing that was 10 times better than what I did. I just looked at me going, what's going on here? This is supposed to be my thing. And everybody came up and they were like, oh, look, hers is wonderful. It's great. And I'm smiling because I'm happy for her, but I'm also just like, yeah, it is great. Why does mine not look like that? Was it such a strange sort of situation? But it was the first time I've got to do anything traditional. I'm hoping to find more time to get around to it, but I'm sure you had the experience too, having young kids. You know, our kids are 3 and 5 now. To whip out an easel and a canvas and paints, it simply wouldn't happen. If it wasn't for the advent of digital illustration, there's no way that I would be able to be at the situation that I am now. Maybe one day.
Yeah, that's a really tricky thing, yeah, and especially in that phase of life But also, good on your wife for having that skill that she didn't know about. Maybe
She nailed it.
it's pretty
And
cool.
I'm equally happy for her and also very, very jealous, in
Yes.
equal measures. And everyone, she was very, very proud of herself, as she should have been. And she went around with the two canvases to everyone we knew, going, which one do you think he painted? And so they would always paint the one that she had did, and she's just no. So she still holds that over to me to this day. She does like to remind me of it. So interesting.
That's funny. Well, there are times where my wife has definitely outshined me in something that she was a complete novice at, and I know that feeling of just being like, "Well, hey, hang on a second." Well, that's how it goes. Um, yeah. Well, the other thing too is I just realized since college I've only painted two pictures, like really painted two
Yeah.
pictures. One was a gift from my wife on our anniversary like 4 or 5 years ago, and it was literally 6 by 8 inches. I mean, the tiniest of paintings and very poorly done. And the second was at a Heroes Convention. Heroes Convention is a comic convention in the southeast of the United States.
Uh-huh.
Um, and for the auction there, I decided to break out real paint and do something. And that actually turned out well, and it made me want to paint again. I was like, I want to paint. And I never did. That was at least 5 or 6 years ago, I think. I don't remember. So
I
that's
think we
kind of
get very
scary.
comfortable with being able to just whip out an iPad and get stuck into an illustration that we think, oh, I want to go paint. Oh, where's the easel? Oh, where have I put the paints? Do I have any
Yeah.
canvases here? And there are a few little roadblocks along that way, I suppose.
Well, most importantly, where's the undo? There's no undo.
That's true. Yeah. I
So that
kept
could be
double tapping at the canvas when we were painting, going, why is this not working?
right.
What's going on here? So one of the things I wanted to finish up our interview with today was I was following along one of the things you had talked about on Twitter, and it's a big talking point and a big hot button issue, I suppose, in the art world at the moment. And you'd mentioned it a few times, and it was this idea with AI art being this
Oh yeah.
prevailing thing that came along. And I forget the name of the artist, but you had put up something on Twitter there. It might have been about a month ago at this point, where someone had Googled a painter, and the first images that were coming up of his work were
Yes.
digital AI generated things. And I was just wondering, in general, your kind of outlook and your take on the art world in general, and of course, AI being
Yeah, sure.
that big hot button topic at the moment.
Yeah, the artist was Edward Hopper, American painter,
Yes.
early 20th century, and I'd actually just been to see a Hopper show in New York that was phenomenal in October. One of my favorites, and I saw that somebody had posted on Google that if you search for Edward Hopper and the image results, one of the very first one was an AI generated image. Obviously, that's a Google problem more than anything.
Yeah.
We need them to have better AI detection, and they need to figure out how to solve that. But yeah, in my opinion, it's not even art. It's AI quote unquote art. I think it's just AI images. It's a way
Yeah.
of generating an image based on billions of images that have come before it. Just kind of a sort of this machine learning. They learn to identify styles and body parts and elements of nature and whatever else, and then um, different color themes that are used frequently and so on. If you look at a lot of the results from Midjourney, there is a very similar sort of sameness to the color schemes and the color,
Yeah.
and the rendering is always completely tight all the way throughout the picture. The compositions are terrible. This is because there's no human there guiding the design of the picture plane and understanding
Uh-huh.
composition, understanding focal points, and understanding how to draw out emotion through color and um, or rather create an emotional response from the viewer. All the things that make art so great because of the human involvement really aren't there. So the result is you get something that's maybe by certain standards, quote unquote, pretty.
Hmm.
Anybody who makes art themselves or knows a little bit about art is not going to consider it pretty because they know the difference. But um, what worries me is the race to the bottom, where there are enough people out there who would normally pay an artist to create a work, no matter how small. A
Hmm.
great example would be that when I started, and even until recently, a lot of the work I did was just called spot illustration, little spot illustration of a person walking out the door to go to work, a little spot illustration of somebody just sitting in a park having a sandwich, whether for books or for editorial purposes. Um, and these add up, and so they accumulate, and the money accumulates because of these little jobs. they're a great stepping stone. They're a great starting point for artists who want to get into illustration for book and editorial, to start with spot illustration. They're a low lift. Um, if these kinds of things are no longer being assigned as assignment work, it eliminates yet another way for people, another entry point into
Yeah.
illustration for people, which is very bad. But then you come right up to the top level where you have book illustration for covers, which has been a really great and booming kind of business for the last few years because of the popularity of middle grade reader books and sci-fi and fantasy books for these high school kids and everything, and also for young adults and even older adults. So you've seen an explosion of illustrated covers in these genres. Well, already, unfortunately, some publishers wishing to save some money are just going to, they're working with some AI to generate some of the covers, either for just the online versions of a book, if there isn't a printed version, or even for the printed versions.
Yeah.
If we see that happening now before there's even a copyright allowance there for that work to even be used, I mean, artists haven't been the artists on who um, the AI trained were never
Yeah.
paid. They were never compensated. This is the biggest sticking point beyond anything else. That in order for these companies to profit, so Midjourney, et cetera, if they wish to make money on their product, um, in my view, it's illegal to do so without having had any permission from the artists. Um,
Certainly, I
you
think
know,
that is definitely one of the bigger issues. Speaking to other artists and seeing the way people respond to AI art in general, it seems that the work that's kind of swallowed up by these computer systems and these learning systems, people are putting their artwork online, and that artwork is being taken without their consent. It's
mhm.
They haven't put that up there for it to be used in this way, and I think with how much of a new technology it is, there doesn't really seem to be the legal protections put in place for artists who are coming up. It is still very much the Wild West at the minute, and I think it will be very, very difficult to really implement a lot of laws that would offer protections for any artists, because you would imagine that these systems, they will be so vast that enforcing it would be quite difficult. But certainly, I think when you're talking about those entry level jobs, these are the things that people use as a means to break into the industry, and I think that's probably where AI art does kind of present the biggest issue. I don't think we're going to get to a point where we see AI generated art up in gallery walls. I don't think
Mm.
that's where it's going to go. But with it being still, I suppose, relatively in its infancy as a technology, certainly when you're talking about those book illustrations, it is an area where I could see there's a publisher who they're not particularly interested perhaps in the integrity of the art being used. They need something cheap, they need something quick, and they're obviously going to go in that sort of direction. And in one sense, from a business point of view, I understand where they're coming from, but it just does seem like there should be some sort of tipping point where there will be kind of some sort of legal protection brought in for this. I'm not sure how it would work, but yeah, it's definitely
Well,
a worrying thing.
the funny thing is how the justification, I mean, how they dance around, well, we'll go ahead and use AI for the cover, but you're not using AI to write the book. So the writer's getting paid and the writer's getting money, but the book, with we all know if you are looking at books, half the time the reason you even pick one up in the first place, if not more often than half the time, is the cover art.
Yeah.
And so obviously that plays an important role in the sale of the book. And these, a lot of covers go on to become an iconic sort of representation of that title of the right for the writer. I mean, there are certain books that we think of, like the Harry Potter series and so on. You recognize the illustrations by Mary Grand Pré, as just being this sort of fixture of the industry, and it's something that you recognize in the United States. Now in England, they had a different artist whose name I'm forgetting, but when they first came out, and that's everyone relates to that. And the same for J.R.R. Tolkien's books and the illustrations of Alan Lee, and they go hand in hand, and so they're important. But then look at concept art for film and video games and TV, and look at the production art for
Yeah.
movies and animated films and so on, and you get into a whole other big problem where backgrounds will just be generated, or character design, or spaceships and other equipment and weapons and things like that for these games and for films. These are important jobs that humans are currently doing. I don't see any reason why we need to use technology to replace artists of all things. I think
Uh-huh.
I understand, like, if there's coal mining to be done and you can use some drilling machines and take care and people don't die in the coal mines,
Yeah.
there are probably better things for them to do with their lives, and maybe that's good. Um, but the beauty that we create as humans in the form of the arts in general, I think it's a loss if we are trying to automate that even further. Or yeah, I'm concerned about it just as you are, and I work for a tech company, and I think that we have an opportunity as a tech company to do it in a way that's a lot more of a tool based approach. I think if we can create tools for artists, literally
Yeah.
for artists, not for the people who are their customers, to cut them out of the equation, but if we can create tools for artists, then I think we're on a good path.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Anyway, I think that's a great place for us to jump off. Thank you very much for joining us today and here on our first ever episode. So it was an absolute pleasure. If you're interested in follow anything else with Kyle, I'm going to be putting all of the links to his socials down in the description. So do make sure that you go and check out his work and say hello. Thank you very much, and we'll see you again in the next episode.